The reason I wanted to do this stream in particular is because I know I promised I was going to have a little short stream about class, because I think this is something that is continually misunderstood in America and Britain and other English-speaking countries, as far as I'm concerned, countries where the language I can understand, specifically in the West. Doesn't seem like people have a good understanding of what class is. And if you're active on a shithole site called Twitter, there's all sorts of stupid fucking debates that are going on about class reductionism versus identity politics, race versus class, and then worst of all, you have intersectionality. And intersectionality is not really something I've seen Marxists, even the ones I would consider myself sympathetic to, really address and be able to overcome. It seems like implicitly everybody's a kind of intersectional. So while class is important, but other things are important too. It's a really undialectical view because it doesn't situate what class is. I want to have this talk about class because it seems to me even a lot of Marxist-Leninists in the Anglosphere, English-speaking Marxist-Leninists, tend to take... I've seen, for example, I don't want to call anybody out. I'm not someone out to start drama or nothing. I'm not that type of person. I've seen videos, let me just say it, they're not starting drama. I don't have a problem with the person. But the guy named Hugo Pink, I've seen one of his videos. I'm not too familiar with the guy, but as I was watching one of his videos, he said something that is repeated often on BreadTube, and I was kind of surprised to see him say it. He said he implied basically that class was defined by your ability to fire people and the power you have in the workplace and the ability to have that kind of control. Well, actually, that's not a materialistic definition or view of class. That's actually a political definition of class, right? Politics is about what? Politics is a thing that's about sovereignty and power and control and all that kind of stuff. And we've been seeing in the West that there's this influx of, I think Caleb calls it postmodernism. It kind of traces to a French thinker called Foucault, who replaced the Marxist class analysis, the materialistic analysis, with an analysis that was fixated on power and relationships of power. And power was the supreme thing. Not material relations of production, but power, control, domination, and so on and so on. So it's kind of concerning to see that there's Marxist-Leninists out there, or people adjacent to our tanky sphere, who are kind of concurring with that Americanization of the class analysis. Class is actually not defined by the power you have in the workplace and your ability to influence decision making and all that kind of stuff. That's more of a political and cultural type of thing. It has actually nothing to do with... Well, everything has something to do with everything. That's a dialectical view. But that's actually not how Marxists in the past have defined or understood what class is. Class is not political, it's economic. You can talk about the political and cultural implications of that, that's fine. And among those, maybe include the tremendous, deciding power that bosses have over workers. But that's actually not what defines what the class is. Yeah, you hear some more populist right conservatives like Sagar Enjeti, I don't know who that is, talking about the managerial elite. Well, that is a thing, don't get me wrong, but it's not necessarily the same thing technically as the class as Marx was understanding it. But you can easily see that there is a professional managerial elite that can be understood as a definite social formation in our society. But it's not technically what a class is in Marxism. And what a class is, I'm going to get to really quick. And it's so simple, guys, it's going to blow your mind. Trying to vaguely sound like they're talking about class when the managers still work for Capital 2. Ewok, that's a very interesting point, because according to the dogmatic West Marxist view, actually CEOs are the working class because they don't actually technically own the means of production. They too are employees who are hired. I've seen that as a libertarian talking point, and people tend to just dismiss it as that, but I haven't seen a good response to that argument, and it's actually a completely valid argument. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no difference between CEOs and the average Joe in America. What it means is that Western Marxists need to go back to the basics and really reevaluate what they're taking for granted, because the way they've responded to that is by saying, well, CEOs have more power. But actually, power is not what defines classes and class relations. Neat. Isn't the political power reflected in the material? Well, traditionally, isn't it the opposite, Neat? Isn't it that the political is actually what reflects the material? The material is actually what's primary? I think a lot of that relationship, the whole base and superstructure analogy is a little bit confused, and there's a lot of things wrong with it. But it's better than if you were to say the reverse, that political power is what determines class. Yeah, exactly, because the managers don't own the means either. Exactly. I even meant like Foucault and Frankfurt School have some weird psychosexual analysis. Yeah, not getting down that rabbit hole because we don't really have time to the psychoanalysis thing. But specifically, you can still have a coherent understanding of the social differences and the class struggle in the United States between the professional managerials and the people, but you need to get your theory correct first, and then it'll be all clear what we're dealing with. What is a peasantry? What is the proletariat? What is the people, the populist people, right? What is the professional managerial class? What is the metropolitan petite bourgeoisie? Why is there somehow a difference between city proletariat and rural proletariat? You know what I'm saying? So this is really something that's multi-dimensional that we're dealing with. But if we can square off a correct understanding of class, it'll enable us to make sense of all of these other really complicated things, including what's addressed by so-called intersectionality, which is race. Well, what about race? Isn't race just as important as class? But they're different things is the thing. You have to understand what class is first, and then it'll be clear why there's a racial antagonism and all this kind of stuff, anti-imperialism and so on and so on. Yeah, I read Sagar and Crystal's book and thought it was good for people that are new to moving towards dissident politics. I'm especially really delighted and glad to see Jimmy Dore's recent video where I didn't watch the whole video, so don't quote me on this, but where he was talking about there's that militia guy, and he said, I'd rather have the people who have guns be pro Black Lives Matter than be against. And he was basically saying that these militia type people, maybe they have a potential. And I like that Jimmy Dore, he's stepping outside of the so-called progressive box, and he's realizing we're entering a new era of politics in the United States. So I was really glad to see that direction Jimmy Dore is headed in. I think Sagar and Crystal are kind of on the same page. Yeah, it's straight up great to reach out to other people like that Jimmy is doing. Yeah, I think we're all here at the Infrared Show. We're all big fans of Jimmy Dore. What's up, Papa Chulo? Glad to see you back. How you doing? Agreed. We need to understand the base before we get into the superstructure. Exactly. I want to just have a simple understanding what is class, and then it'll allow us to have a more nuanced and ability to apply it, and everything will be very simple when we have this. The first thing I want to do is I want to give you guys a brief historical background about the origin of the significance of class, specifically in the 19th century. Okay. So the first thing I want to ask the chat, and everyone, you can share what you think, but I want to get this ball rolling by having you guys think about this. Why is it that something called class as a concept, the concept of class, why would this enter into significance? Now, for almost all of recorded human history, I say recorded, emphasis on recorded, the Boog Boys are anti-racist and willing to fight for what they believe. Their thing is that don't differentiate from a bourgeois state and a proletariat. Well, yeah, they're not Marxist, but the main thing, and I'm going to kind of get to this, is this question of you have a white supremacy either way. So Vosh is the person who says, let's side with the white supremacist state and the institutions, because those are formally making him feel like a safe space, as opposed to the rebellious, toxic masses. But the Marxist and materialist view would be that state actually comes from the masses. So if there's any hope whatsoever, it's going to come from those masses. If you want to have a reset and you want to overcome white supremacy, you don't side with the establishment, you don't side with the city white people, you're going to side with the rural white people, because the rural white people are the material foundation, and racism and all that kind of stuff is a kind of superstructural thing, right? So if you go to the origin and source, maybe they're racist or toxic and all this stuff, but at least they have the potential to generate something new. And that's always been the Marxist view, since Lenin at least. But I would also argue it was Marx's view as well, but it's just kind of been hushed up and de-emphasized. But anyway, what I was talking about is, in the 19th century, why is it that something like class became a concept? Because for all of mankind's recorded history, there's always been observable social differentiations. There's been different castes, there's been feudalism, obviously, but even before feudalism, there's different ranks, there's nobles, there's slaves, there's all sorts of social distinctions that existed before industrial capitalism. But only with Marxism do we have a general concept of class. So what I want to get the ball rolling and have you guys think about is, what is the origin of the concept of class? Why do we have a concept of class in general? The question I'm throwing out there for you guys to think about is, what is the origin of the concept of class? Because the general concept of class has its origin with Marx, or not necessarily Marx, but in the 19th century. Before the 19th century, there were castes and social distinctions of all sorts in all civilizations. But there was never a general concept of a class. If you wanted to talk about class, you were going to be talking about particular classes. If you lived in the feudalism, right, you're talking about knights and nobles and all that kind of bullshit, and you're just talking about the particular classes. You're not talking about class in general. So the thing we want to think about is, how did class in general arise, okay? That's the most important thing that has to be interrogated if we want to arrive at a good understanding of class where we are right now. The theory of class appeared when it needed to, when the old class structure broke down and people needed to describe. But Mr. D, here's the problem with that, is that class structures have always been broken down and rebuilt and so on across the history of humanity, so that was nothing new. That specifically was nothing new. The ancients did have a concept of social distinctions as a general rule, though. Right, but class in general, right? Class in the abstract, in the sense of Marxism, specifically as it concerns material relations of production and not just explicit political distinctions and rank and so on and so on. So that's the question we have to answer. Perhaps production became a social act, as Engels said. But I would argue, and I think Marx and Engels would argue the same thing, is that production was always social. I mean, from the very beginning of humanity, it was social. The difference between kings, freemen, slaves, merchants, and priests. Right, there had always been class distinctions, but a general theory and concept of class is something modern. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up to two great hostile camps. Nietzsche's hitting on the money here. Nietzsche is the one hitting on the money here, I think. He's quoting, society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, two classes directly facing each other. There's something really significant about that, okay? Two, okay? Just two. In the history of mankind, there is all sorts of social distinctions. Clearly, in our society, there's all sorts of different kinds of social distinctions. But in the modern era, as was described by Marx and Engels, society is splitting up into two great hostile camps. Only two, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and unravel this in a dialectic way. Gonna explain this in a dialectic way. The reason why there arose a general concept of class is because of this. It's very simple. It was because of the French revolutions, okay, which was itself the culmination of a certain history. The French Revolution's destruction of official distinctions in the sphere of the state and politics. Meaning the French Revolution destroyed all state and politically recognized social distinctions. After the French Revolution, from the perspective of the state and the law, everyone was equal. It's what they call bourgeois or formal equality. Some people might object that there still existed discrimination, maybe against minorities or but ultimately, within the polity, the French polity, if you're a citizen of the French polity, you are an equal, okay? And quite explicitly, this is actually a form of what they call neoclassicism, okay? Classicism, which began in the Renaissance and was developed through, specifically cultivated as an aesthetic trend and also another kind of trend in England. Remember, the British Empire, I'm kind of schizo all over the place, bear with me here. The British Empire was looking toward Rome, the Roman Empire, as it was considering itself the heir of the Roman Empire. And the cultural, the culture of the French Revolution was very influenced by this history of looking back to ancient Rome as the golden age that was lost from the Middle Ages. So this began in the Renaissance, basically, okay? And within the Roman and Greek, whatever, polities, right? There was this formal equality before the law for citizens. The meaning of a republic, okay, a republic meant some type of way in which the state recognized everyone, gave everyone political recognition, and premised all members of a polity as the responsible and civil participants of the state. Before then, the state was basically the king as a glorified warlord. Eugenics, I actually think that hasn't changed. I'll get to that. The disintegration of hereditary rule, not specifically. The essential thing is the French Revolution's complete destruction of distinctions, politically recognized distinctions in citizenship. There was just the citizen who's a member of the republic. And this is a neoclassical type of politics, hearkening back to the days of ancient Rome and ancient Greece, specifically ancient Rome. There's that famous picture of the French Revolution. I can't show it on stream right now, maybe I can, but I don't know if it's worth it, of the oath of the Horatii or whatever, where they're giving that kind of Roman salute. This was an iconic picture of the French Revolution. So it's the French Revolution that made possible a general understanding of class. Why? Because in the French Revolution, right, there arose a concept of the citizen. Because to put a long story short, after the formal equality of the French Revolution, which made everyone a citizen who was a part of the polity, the political polity, a citizen of the republic, it could still be observed that there were some kind of social distinction. Some kind of social distinction, some essential social distinction can be observed. Let me go further with this. After the Restoration, if you guys know about that, because I don't want to take anything for granted, after the Restoration, right, and after the defeat of Napoleon, the French monarchy was restored. So the French Revolution became a distant ideal for Europe's intellectuals and thinkers, and the way in which they were responding to their contemporary injustices and antagonisms was looking back to the good old ideals of the French Revolution, namely responding to the injustices and inequalities and all that of the ancien regime and the restored order by Mitterrand or whatever, was basically looking toward this equality, formal equality, as the model of the future. We want to be equal citizens, no more lords, no more nobles. That was basically the trend, right? Socialism before socialism, more or less. Okay, I'm simplifying a lot of things, but yeah. Proto-socialism, Tova, in the sense that people who would later become socialist intellectuals were first, for example, the English Romantics, they were first looking at the ideals of the French Revolution as basically the way in which they were making sense of the world. Basically, the ideals of the French Revolution, right? The neoclassicism of the French Revolution, this return to republican equality, republican virtue. This was basically the way in which people were expressing this deeper aspiration for some kind of social equality. But let's get back to this main point, okay? The main point is that after the Restoration, the intellectuals of Europe, people who were thinking of higher ideals to respond to society's ailments, they were looking at the French Revolution, they were looking at the republican equality of the citizen as basically the way to respond to society's ills, society's problems. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because it's not just that they could observe that social distinctions persisted in spite of the fact that everyone was equal formally. Because even before everyone was formally equal, again, because you have to bear in mind that the French Republic came to an end and the monarchy was restored, people came to the realization, I forget who the author was, but this is the guy who actually brought into being the term proletariat. This is the origin of the term the proletariat. The reason is people could put two and two together about the fact that even on this very abstract level, and this intellectual abstract level, you could deduce arithmetically, right, that even if we are all equal politically, there is some kind of contradiction, some kind of paradox that persists. Nietzsche brought this up with the quote, in society there seem to be two great classes forming. I forget the exact quote. Maybe he can quote it again. There we go. Nietzsche just linked the quote again. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other. And basically that's what we're talking about here. That's the paradox, the antagonism that you could even deduce and arrive at on this abstract intellectual level. If you held as an ideal that the key to society, to solving or responding to society's ailments, lies in the Republican equality of the citizen, you could even deduce in your head why it is that society would split up into two great hostile camps, two great classes directly facing each other. Actually, this is what was happening in England. In England, even before the reforms that would basically create some measure of common social equality as far as the state was concerned, right? That everyone's a citizen with equal rights and so on and so on, the universal suffrage and all those kinds of things, people could perceive that Republican equality of the citizen was not going to be able to respond to this deeper type of antagonism that was happening in society. So guys, pay attention to the quote Neat just shared. Jorge's joining. Awesome. I need you guys to bear this in mind. Formal political equality is the premise of having a concept of class. This is what makes possible a concept of class, and it's also something you need to presuppose in order to have a concept of class. This is how it is basically. You have a polity or a nation of some kind. Let's say France. Everyone is an equal citizen. You have to presuppose this first in order for the essence of class to reveal itself, as what Nietzsche described as society splitting up into two great camps. Now, England didn't have formal political equality, and England was the quintessential example of this splitting up into two camps. But it was taken as an article of proof for the romantic ideologists of the French Revolution that, in fact, formal political equality is not actually enough to address or solve this paradox. And in fact, it's the very premise of this paradox, okay? When we are all equal, when we're all politically equal, so to speak, that's actually when class reveals itself. Political equality is what reveals the essence of class. And now I'm going to get to what is class, right? Finally, what this whole stream is about. I'm going to give you a coherent and extremely simple understanding of what class is. Ready? In fact, abstractly and intellectually speaking, I want you guys to open up a hypothetical bubble in your head. I'm not asking you to accept this wholesale and apply it to every single, just a hypothetical bubble in your head. You can think about it in this way is what I'm trying to say. There are actually only two real classes. There are only two real classes. There are actually, in fact, only two classes, okay? There are only actually two real classes, okay? The classes, these two classes, are the result of formal political equality. Formal political equality, specifically as it's relevant to the sphere of exchange, the exchange of goods. Okay, the exchange of goods. Why is this? Why does the formal political equality that allows all of us to exchange goods as equals and enter into relationships contractually rather than based on tradition or bondage or slavery or serfdom or whatever you want to call it? Yes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat are in fact the only two classes. If we're talking about the essence of what class is, there's only two classes. And the presupposition of class, the only way we can arrive at the true essence of class is if we in our heads, even hypothetically as a thought experiment, just assume that everyone is politically equal. Assume that everyone is equal and is free to enter into contractual exchanges with one another rather than exchanges and association that's based in tradition or based in bondage, some kind of forced bondage like serfdom. This is where we see class. This is where class makes itself evident. And this is the reason why. The reason why is very simple. Inevitably, when we're all equal actors selling our goods, there's one good that also needs to be sold. And you know this as labor. But why is that significant? Why does this create such a paradox? Why does this create such an antagonism? Why is it such an antagonism that on the one hand, goods are sold, physical things are sold and exchanged and brought onto the market, and on the other hand, labor is? Why is labor such an important exception? It's very simple. It's a very simple type of arithmetic. You don't need anything complicated to think about why labor is so significant. Ready? Because for all the goods that are going to be exchanged in the market, labor is the condition of possibility of those goods. Labor, abstractly defined, just means the thing that is the source of all those goods. So the paradox of labor as something that becomes sold as a good, similar in the way that you would sell rice and beans and fucking bread and I don't know what else, be a craftsman selling jewels and pottery or whatever you want. The reason why it's so paradoxical that labor itself becomes sold as just another good is because labor is actually the source of all goods. Labor in the abstract. And this is formally true. This is even formally true. When you're paid for you're paid for your labor abstractly in wages, in money, okay? You're paid for your labor abstractly. So this is even formally true. This is the source of class, okay? Because some people must primarily sell their own labor. Not only their own labor, but labor in general, which they participate in, because remember, labor is social. Some people, the majority of people, at least if we presuppose this pure equality of citizens, some people are going to be selling labor itself. Labor, which is the source of goods. And some people will only sell goods. Some people will sell goods and buy labor in order to produce goods. And some people will only be able to sell labor itself. That is the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. You can think of the fact that there's only two classes in this very simple sense. One class has to sell labor. Another class sells the product of labor. One class sells labor. One class sells the product of labor. Labor, very simply, refers to the human and social conditions of possibility of the product. This is why it's so paradoxical. I will sell you a jacket, which is the example Marx likes to use in Capital. I will sell you a jacket which crystallizes a certain amount of labor. Some people will sell the labor itself that makes the jacket possible. The conditions of the possibility of products are social and human in nature, okay? They don't come from nowhere. With the whole question of automation, that's become more complicated, and I'll get to that. But I just want us to all be on the same page about this. Control of the labor power? No. NEET. I don't know if you're trolling NEET. Forget about control, okay? Forget about control. Everybody just focus on this simple fact. We are all equal agents in the marketplace. All of the relations we're entering in with one another are based on contractual equal relationships. It's not about control. It's simply about the fact that some people are selling goods and some people have to sell the very source of those goods, because the source of those goods is social and human in nature. Work is what produces those goods. Now, this whole question of automation and all these confusions, I'll get to. But I want you guys to X out the political element, because when we're introducing politics, we're losing the ball, okay? To understand class, you need to think of politics only abstractly. Yes, it's premised by politics, and I'll get to that, but just assume everyone is equal politically. If you assume that, you're going to arrive at the essence of class. When you start talking about control, this may cover class relations, but it's not actually what's essential. Okay? Because even if we're all equal formally as citizens, some inevitable paradox of class is still arising. Guys, not to go off on a tangent, but this whole issue with control and domination is actually something based in the information age. What we call the information age. Because with cybernetics, which is a loaded word, with the computer age and the information age, you're dealing with huge structures and systems of scale. So this issue of control and information and feedback, that's why control has become so significant in the way Marxists are presenting class. But they're forgetting the actual origins in history that made this concept necessary and possible. Dialectical materialism is about materialism. Okay, let me just continue on this for now. Just so we're on the same page, right, guys? Condensing what I just said, okay? First, we have something called political formal equality, neoclassicist, Roman Republican equality of citizens. Presupposing this, which means that all of the relations that we're entering in on the marketplace are based on voluntary and free contracts, contractual association. This is liberalism, by the way, more or less liberalism. This is the meaning of liberalism, is this: these relationships are purely defined by explicit, voluntary, and contractual relationships. This is basically liberalism, so that's why it existed in England. Presupposing this, some people are selling goods and some people are selling the very means by which goods are possible, which is labor. And this can even be a hypothetical construction. You can even imagine this and deduce this in your head as just something that makes sense. It doesn't even have to express itself as a real phenomena. You can anticipate the proletariat before the proletariat even exists, just from this basic fact. We have goods. The requirements for the realization of goods are social and human in nature, specifically in the form of labor. Therefore, some people, the only goods that they're going to have is the very conditions of goods possibility, labor. And it's kind of paradoxical because labor is included as just one good among others, and yet labor is only defined as what you need for goods to be possible. You see what I'm saying? So we're on the same page. Now let me explain to you very simply why our views are heterodox and we diverge from Western Marxism, and we think Western Marxists don't have a dialectical or materialist view of class. Because keep in mind what I just said, and this is where you should have turned something on in your head when I said this. It presupposes formal political republican equality that's based in a polity, that's based in nation. But there's two problems with that. One, this formal equality doesn't exist in the either somewhere. It's instanced in some kind of common political institution, some kind of common polity, some kind of definite, determinate state, some real thing. The French state doesn't exist in the either. It's something that actually exists in reality. And if it actually exists in reality, then its premises are material. It doesn't come from nowhere. So we cannot make the assumption, actually, that everyone is an equal citizen for two very simple reasons. The first reason is that there are different states. Moreover, there are different nations. And nations give rise to states, right? There are different nations and there are different states. And the second most important reason is that even when you consolidate some kind of formal equality, it's always incomplete. I'm going to give you an example of why it's always incomplete. Even when you've created formal equality in the eyes of the state, republican equality, that allows all of us to be equal participants in the market, this is never complete. This is never fully consolidated. And the reason is very simple. It's what I just said. The foundations of the polity. You guys know what a polity is? A polity is a more general word for a state. But it's more general because a polity can refer to any type of instantiation of political power that encompasses a people. So that's a polity. A polity is just a more general word for a state. I don't really like the word state that much. I prefer polity. It's more specific. A polity, because a polity is determinate in particular, the way in which it's able to recognize and give recognition to the people over whom it rules is going to be limited. And I'm going to give you France actually as the very example of this. So France is a polity, right? France recognizes all of its people as equal citizens who are free. But here's the problem. Because it is materially limited, because it's determinate in real, the state, the extent of the people living in France who are able to be recognized by the institution of the French state, the polity, is inevitably going to be limited. It's going to be limited specifically to the people who are first and foremost geographically close to the institutions out of which this state exerts its power, the cities. In the countryside, majority of the French nation maybe, they are going to be excluded by these institutions, not because the institutions don't want them, but because the institutions are materially limited in their ability to encompass all of the people in the polity over which it has dominion. So, institutions of the state that I'm going to use an Althusserian word, that interpolate people as citizens, equal citizens, are materially definite and therefore finite and limited. The polity, right, even within a nation, is going to be limited in regards to its material foundation in the people. You have the majority of the people, and you have institutions that interpolate the people as equal citizens. But these institutions are materially limited and definite. They're finite. They're not inevitably going to encompass everyone. There's aspects of the people that it necessarily is going to not be able to take into account, because the people are infinite. The people are material. They're infinite in a sense, right? They're the very foundation of these institutions. The institutions are finite. Do you guys follow me on this so far? The first one I think you understand, which is that there are different states and there are different polities. That's the first mistake Marxists overlook. There's different states and there's different polities. But even within the states and the polities, the way in which institutions make their people universal and equal citizens is limited. Because now we're entering really tough waters. This has been far more digestible and engaging than most of the lectures I had at uni and GL. I'm really glad to hear it. Like I said, everyone says I'm a schizo, I'm incomprehensible, and nothing I say makes sense. So it's kind of surprising even that you guys are saying this, and I'm really glad. I want you guys to think about this in the contemporary context. In America specifically, why is there a distinction between cities and the countryside, what's called the countryside? Is it because there's something specific about agriculture? Well, maybe. But in the United States and many other countries, and also, this is another important thing, countries where the rural countryside is formed by nomads who are not agricultural laborers, and that was also true historically, the rural is not really defined by agriculture. The rural is actually defined by the place that is outside of these materially limited and finite institutions that make all of us equal, formally equal, or at least formally recognized in some way. The reason cities contrast so much with the countryside is because in cities, the institutions, geographically, this is what I'm saying, the internet actually complicates this in really interesting ways. But geographically speaking, the reason cities are so different from countryside is because within cities, the institutions that give recognition to us as formally equal that's the center of those institutions. So that's where those institutions are able to immediately exert the power. That's why cities are bubbles, they're echo chambers, they're safe spaces. That's why institutions in America are the same way. Especially institutions, materially limited institutions. Yeah, the point we were trying to say, Jennifer, but we were speaking in the 19th century context, I kind of fast forwarded applying it to America today, is that every type of polity, and the word polity just means a more general word for a state. I don't like the word state because I think it's too specific. I like the word polity. A polity just refers to some type of political dominion that encompasses people. But every polity is finite and therefore materially limited. A polity also has material premises. But Marxists never have given recognition in the West to the material premise of a polity itself. And in fact, formally speaking, Mao Zedong was the first Marxist that I know of at least, who gave recognition to the polity as actually something materially definite. That's the whole point of Mao's encircling the cities from the countryside. And that's the whole reason why Mao had three worlds theory and all those kinds of stuff in the first place. It's why Chinese Marxism is generally so much more advanced. But I'm not going to go off on it. The schizo side is coming and I'm going off on a tangent about things. Let's just keep focused on where we are right now. So the reason there's a distinction between cities and the countryside. You guys know why there's a distinction then? The reason is very simple, because the countryside just refers to the great majority of masses of people who are by default excluded from the state's institutions and the state's formal equality, not because the state is actively excluding them, but because there's aspects about the countryside that cannot be reined in or domesticated by the state or its institutions. There's aspects, of these people in the countryside, their living being, their way of life, that resists this full domestication by the state that interpolates them as equal, formal citizens, or just instantiated in institutions in general. It's true, most people likely benefit from the institutions, don't want them to change. Well, I'm going to get to why Marxists in the West get everything wrong. What are the aspects of resistance? Well, Jennifer, I think in the intuition, I think I can make this pretty clear, and you'll understand what I mean. Think about the coronavirus crisis. Now, I live in Michigan, not to dox myself. Yes, the hillbillies, exactly. Everyone knows that the countryside is more wild than cities. Countryside, people are less obedient to authorities than people in cities. In the countryside, people are more independent. They're more rebellious in general. I think on an intuitive level, I think we can all get that, right? The people who stormed the Capitol, that's another example. So that's what I mean by resistance. And think about the coronavirus also. The people least likely to follow the rules about coronavirus and most likely to not have a respect for the authorities are people in the countryside. I mean, just intuitively. I mean, factually, if it's true or not, just put that on the back burner. In our intuitions, we think this, right? And I think there's a reason why we think that always. Okay, so here's the issue with Western Marxists. Going on top of that, right? Piggybacking off of that. The issue with Western Marxists is that the essence of class seems to be disclosed in these cities because it's in cities that we are formally equal. What's up, Evan? How you doing? Everybody? You guys know Evan, right?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you for joining
me. Yeah. Guys, get this. Get this. We have 27 likes and 28 viewers. Isn't that fucking crazy? That means almost everyone here liked this video. That is fucking insane. That is so impressive. We've never done that before. We appreciate that so much, guys. That's such a compliment, Jennifer, let me get to Jennifer's question. But you stated seems to be in terms of class in the cities. Well, yeah, in the cities, I won't say seems to be, I'll just say it straight. In cities, it's clear that people are somehow much more formally equal in cities. People are more free in cities in the sense that in the countryside, you're weighed down by your traditions and your family and all these kinds of things. Or maybe you're a serf. Actually, historically, in the Middle Ages, you were a serf working in the countryside. If you escaped, you'd move to these cities, and that'd be a fresh start, right? So in a city, right, that's where actually people are interpolated, to use this heavy Althusserian word, which I can explain. It basically just means branded, if you will, by the state as formally equal citizens, Republican equality, right? Who enter into relationships on a contractual basis, on a fresh basis. They don't enter into relationships based on tradition. They enter into relationships on a fresh basis, and the only way to validate whether those relationships are voluntary or not is through contracts. And now in the West, you're seeing a tendency, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but you're seeing a tendency in which everything seems to be contractual. And this is really the decline of liberalism. I've seen people who say that a baby needs to give consent to change its diaper. It needs to sign a contract for its diaper to be changed. Because changing the baby's diaper is a violation. City versus countryside is an important conversation. No More Libs, you're so right about that, and we're trying to really clarify on a theoretical level why that is, and why Western Marxists have always gotten it wrong. So, kind of getting back to what I was saying, Marxists in the West have always made a fatal assumption, a fatally wrong, an idealist assumption. Actually, an idealist assumption. So, Marxists make the mistake that, so they observe that in the cities, that is actually where class is being revealed. Because in cities, that is actually where people are formally equal citizens entering into relationships based on contractual and formally free association. But Marxists make a fatal and idealist mistake. intellectual types tend to have chauvinistic tendencies toward country people. I know, but Leonardo, for so long, they've justified it theoretically. And I'm here now to really lay it down why they're wrong theoretically and why actually it's a complete betrayal of Marxism. We know intuitively, I think, all of us know intuitively that countryside is more revolutionary than cities. We know intuitively that peasants are more revolutionary than intellectuals. We know intellectuals are basically counter-revolutionary, petite bourgeois, and so on, but we've only been able to rely on our intuitions. We have these Marxist nerds who come to us acting as priests, telling us that on this theoretical level, ultimately, despite our intuitions, Marx disagrees with us. We're wrong in terms of Marxism theoretically, our intuitions. So I'm here to really try to explain to you guys, even though you might already have the intuition, why this is theoretically true as well. And all of, obviously, these people on BreadTube, and unfortunately even some Marxist-Leninists, they're also reproducing this problem of this kind of misinterpretation of Marxism that comes from the West. Okay? So what follows from this is basically that this is why initially Marx and Engels committed the error, and I can say it was an error because they themselves would admit to this fact later in their lives. And if they didn't admit it explicitly and say the words, "this was an error," they admitted it in practice by denouncing it and disagreeing with it later in life, which is this idea that the communist revolution or the proletarian revolution is going to occur in the more advanced polity. The logical consequence, not only of it occurring in the more advanced polity, is also that it will occur in the cities of that polity rather than the countryside. So you see, it's a double error. It's a logical conclusion. First, you say the backward places are not advanced enough. It's going to have to happen in the advanced countries. Then you say, even in those advanced countries, it's going to happen in the enlightened cities where everyone is politically, formally equal, and the countryside is too backward. And this is a fatal double error. But I don't think Marx was wrong, because I think Marxists have made an assumption about Marx on his position. They made the assumption of stagism. They took for granted the fact that actually Marx was always a dialectician. Marx always thought about this dialectically. And that's why if you look at his analysis of the French, of the 18th Brumaire, right, and the Civil War in France and other works, Marx makes it very clear that the French Revolution, the new French Revolution, requires an alliance between the city proletariat, the people who would carry out the Paris Commune, and the majority, the great majority of the French people, to lead a people's revolution. Because the error Western Marxists have made, drawing from Anglo-Saxon metaphysics, was this idea that this is all occurring chronologically in time. Sequentialism. First it's backward, and the backward evolves into the more advanced. But this is undialectical, because for a dialectical view, they exist simultaneously in time. There's not a temporal difference. And the Bolshevik, the Russian Social Democrats, as they were called in the beginning, engaged in a fierce debate about this. The economists of Russian social democracy said that Russia was too backward and that there shouldn't be any political revolution in Russia because there needs to be an economic transformation first. The Mensheviks were a little step below that, and they said there will be a political revolution which will be led by the big city liberal bourgeoisie. The Bolsheviks were the only ones to interpret Marx's class analysis as one that is simultaneous in time, meaning all of these things actually exist at the same time. It's not referring to some chronological Whig history of backward becoming more advanced. There's a dialectical insight that you have to derive from this that is now, that is in time. Interesting. That was my concern about revolutionary change. If on an international scale, wouldn't it be better to focus on countries with the most revolutionary potential in the imperial core? Well, if we're living in a polity, we are responsible, I think, for our relationship to that polity. I don't necessarily agree with that. But I think it's wrong to say that countries are too backward for revolution. and because the logical consequence of this in our own country is people like Vosh who are saying that people in the countryside are too backward and unenlightened, and that the people, liberals in the city who are enlightened, that's the actual source of leftist movements and socialism in the United States. And it's a fatal error. And if you think about this very practically in America, okay, the consequences of this error are what we see. Marxists in America are very arrogant intellectuals who look down upon the majority of the people in their own country. They think they're better than the majority of people in their own country. And they have this idea that the people in the cities, these institutionalized and over-socialized safe space type people that live in cities, are better than people in the country. And that's why they're kind of these Sam Cedar type, Poindexter, Nathan Robinson, Vosh, I don't care who you call them, they have really nerdy demeanors. You have very few Marxists that have the demeanor of a good old communist, as they were understood in the past. Somebody who was, more rough around the edges in their personality. Somebody who was, who wasn't so timid and so nerdy. And, you can even see it in Mexico. There's places that are semi-feudal here still. The city people are very technocratic. And Jorge knows all about that, and he's explained it a lot at great length. But I kind of want to continue on this point, if that's all right, without divulging too much. And
yeah, we can always come back.
If that's we'll come back to it. But I'm sure Jorge has a lot to say on this. I mean, a lot. He's educated us and told us everything about what's going on in Mexico. And how can Vosh be a nerd when he doesn't even read or lies? Well, Jennifer, for me, a nerd is not someone who reads. A nerd is someone who uses the pretense of intellectual truth as a source of arrogance and a way to look down upon humanity. It's people who think that if you're book smart, it means you're street smart. But actually, people who are book smart are some of the most stupid people you could ever meet. Being street smart is way more important than being book smart. Hell yeah, I was talking about the reactionary character of nerds. Yeah, just to get this ball rolling again. The countryside, if you guys can follow, the polity, the state, has to also be understood as definite and particular, and also materially limited. And the material foundation of the state, the polity, lies in the countryside. That's why we see the distinctions that we do between the city and the countryside. And Marxists have always made the mistake of thinking that because the essence of class reveals itself in the cities, that is actually the site of the class struggle. But they don't understand. They mistaken the site of a revelation of appearance with the site of being, of actual existence. It may be true that the proletariat emerges in cities, but all that does is tell us something about the being. But it doesn't actually mean it's the same thing as being itself. That's why peasants have more revolutionary potential, ultimately. Well, it's not that they have more revolutionary potential, because when states are overthrown, it tends to happen from cities. But think about Mao encircling the cities from the countryside. It's not always the case. Not to suck you off, but the stuff you are saying is what I've been thinking for years. This is spot on. Really glad to hear that No More Libs.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And we don't see it as you sucking us off at all. We believe you, okay? Because we know that intuitively a lot of people really feel this way. But we have a lot of these fake Marxists who are coming here and saying, no, your intuition is wrong. Actually, according to Marxism, the more advanced city proletariat is better than the backward countryside. And we're trying to demonstrate how, from a theoretical Marxist perspective, this is a gross distortion of Marx that has its origin in Western Marxism. My org has a lot of success in building the rural parts of our state recently. No other Marxist group even tries this. I would say this. The class struggle, the essence of class struggle, is revealed to us first in the advanced countries, in England and in cities. But it's a canary in the coal mine. It's only revealed there. It reveals something about being. The real stakes of this class struggle is always going to be about the majority of the people who are excluded from the institutional equality that is the very premise of this apparent class struggle that's going on in the cities. And this revolution is not just about the injustice of an inequality. The revolution, the objectivity of social revolution, basically lies in this simple fact. Institutions are materially limited. States are materially limited. Not only are they materially limited by the countryside being the foundation, but they inevitably enter into contradiction with their premises merely by the confrontation itself. When the state confronts the countryside, when the polity confronts the countryside, its own material foundation, this inevitably gives rise to a conflict because there's an aspect of the countryside that is not able to be domesticated by the state or the polity. And the polity responds to this fact by basically crucifying the people, the countryside. It's almost in an exterminationist way. And it's not only, obviously this isn't only internal to a polity, it's also true for the relationship between different polities and nations. I mean, we know this, the quintessential example of this is colonialism and imperialism. I think all Marxist-Leninists understand what I mean when I say it in that way. But that almost, not in terms of the severity and brutality, but structurally speaking, the same relationship is also going on internally with the countryside of these own countries. And the reason is very simple. The material foundation of the polity lies in the countryside. But the polity does not accept its own material foundation. We cannot actually make the error of just saying, so it's the peasants versus the city and that's it. Because the peasants are what gives rise to the city itself. Cities come from the countryside, guys. Cities basically form when people run away from the countryside, and it's inevitable. So the real stakes of Marxism or communism or whatever you want to call it doesn't lie in just siding with the countryside against the cities. I mean, that's a materialistic instinct you should have. Yes, the material foundation is the countryside. But the real significance of Marxism, because that's nothing new, guys. I mean, populism has always been inevitable. Jimmy Dore is speaking to something without ever having to even think about Marxism. So is maybe Alex Jones, and maybe Donald Trump was doing that too. They didn't have to think about Marxism, and yet this objective social contradiction is revealing itself. No, in fact, the real significance of Marxism is basically lies in the aftermath. The real significance of Marxism is basically the aftermath of this social revolution, where institutions will inevitably be more amicable and more encompassing of the people over whom they exercise dominion. A good example of this happened actually during the New Deal. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who did he appoint as his secretaries and his cabinet? He appointed country folk from Texas and wherever else, these simple people into government. He wanted these people. The reason he wanted these people is because the New Deal corresponded to an objective social revolution that expanded America's state and institutions to encompass and reflect more of its people than it did before. That's kind of almost something that's inevitable, but the real significance of Marxists is to assume leadership over this inevitable social revolution. The real significance of Marxists is to say, yes, we are with the peasants against the country, but a transformation does inevitably await the peasants, and the peasants must prepare themselves for the inevitability of change. We don't even know what that change will necessarily look like. It's just that what's revealed in the cities shows us Marxists that there is a fundamental class antagonism. That's why even if we make all of us formally equal to try to bridge the gap between town and country, there's still going to be a class contradiction. And that's what Marxists are here for. They're here to lead the people through this contradiction. The most popular politician that brought up class issues in America came out of Vermont. I mean, exactly. And we've been seeing this. I mean, guys, it's ridiculous, because the reason we have rule-minded leftists isn't because they arrived at it theoretically. It's just it's so self-evident that they couldn't even help just cave in and say, okay, yes. And it's the same for Marxism-Leninism. We don't have Marxist-Leninists because the majority of Western Marxist-Leninists have arrived at a consistent and coherent theoretical view of why Marxism is compatible with all of these experiences. It's just because of the fact it's so self-evident that why are these revolutions happening in the third world? Why are these revolutions happening in these anti-imperialist situations? And they have to cave in and just call a spade and accept the fact. But they haven't actually reconciled their intuitions with Marxism at this more fundamental theoretical level. Rather, they've almost conceded Marxism to these nerds, so to speak, in having the pretense of, listen, what about trailer parks? I mean, that's another thing, but yes, that's where the people are, you know? I'm not going to here to cause beef or drama. You know, we defend Caleb. We're big fans of Caleb. But I even see Caleb sometimes repeating these dogmas of Western Marxism sometimes. But that doesn't reflect Caleb's actual positions politically. Caleb has an anti-imperialist type of position and so on and so on. It's just an example, guys, okay? Even Marxist-Leninists inevitably get bogged down by the dogmas of traditional Western Marxism. They just make an exception, almost allowing themselves to be inconsistent theoretically to submit and give way to what's basically self-evident and unavoidable about basic experience. If Marxism is telling us that revolutions are only going to happen in the most advanced countries, and yet the real revolutions aren't happening in those countries, you know, Marxist-Leninists are just the people who are saying, okay, but, you know, this is the fact historically, you know. We may not know how to make sense of it theoretically, but it's just it's so self-evident we can't keep denying reality. I think what maybe might distinguish us, but we don't want to knock on an open door, is that we are reconciling Marxism-Leninism with traditional, real classical Marxism of Marx and Engels. There is nothing inconsistent about the experience of Marxism-Leninism with the most original discovery of Marx himself. It's completely consistent. So how do you speak to people in the countryside without pandering them? And it's a very, very good question, Neat. It's an excellent question. You first have to embrace the fact that there is a difference. Okay, you do have to embrace the fact. You can't just LARP and pretend to be you're from the countryside. You have to acknowledge the fact that there is a contradiction, there is a difference between the polity and the countryside, and that you're inevitably going to embody this contradiction in a sense yourself. Even the Maoists during the Chinese Civil War oftentimes would be accused of being too advanced, in a sense, too futuristic, too modern, you know? But they were also, paradoxically, also accused of being too backward. So that's how you know you've hit the sweet spot. And the Bolsheviks were the exact same way. The Bolsheviks were on the one hand too modern and too new and too futuristic, and on the other hand they were too backward and too vulgar and so on and so on. That's the sweet spot. But the way you speak to people in the countryside is also, don't assume, distill the essence of their situation. And the essence is going to come at the expense of the appearance. And what I mean by that basically is that don't pander to them, but speak to the common object of their striving. Give form and speak to the people of the countryside what they know intuitively but don't know maybe culturally or intellectually, even obviously. Name something that they know and understand in their hearts, but they don't have the words to describe. That's what I mean. Speak a language that they understand, but never had the words to make sense of. And this is how you can speak to people from the countryside without pandering. Yes, you are coming from somewhere else. You can't just pretend to be one of them. You have to work with them. You have to gain their trust on this basis. We Marxists are inevitably going to be intellectuals. There's no way around that. We are people who read a lot, and we concern ourselves with very abstract things that are far from being relevant at a directly practical level. That is inevitable. But you have to distinguish yourself from the metropolitan intellectuals similar to you in entering into a dialogue and mutual engagement with the majority of the people in your country, in your polity, as I like to say. People in the countryside will not care for bullshit. Be honest and forthcoming, but also let them know what you're fighting for and how it will benefit them while building on the commonalities. I think the important thing is don't disguise who you are. And that's why I'm wondering, guys, I wonder if the CPUSA can be revived. Because why not just admit we're the good old communists? They're going to call the left communists either way. There's no way around that. There's no way around the fact that the enemy is going to call you that. But at least the CPUSA has tradition in this country. I don't like the politics of the CPUSA, and I don't like its leaders, and I don't like their positions. But I like the brand, and I'm interested in the brand. It's a very national, American, rooted in, it has a tradition, it has name recognition. So I wonder if the CPUSA might have some kind of future. You can't disguise where you're coming from. Yes, we're communists, but maybe you can show the people what it means to be a communist. Lead by example. Don't worry about the fact that they're going to label you a demon. Maybe show them what a demon can do. Show them what it means to be this kind of demon. And they'll change what they think about it. And that's why my biggest advice to you guys, if you're living in these communities at least, or you're engaging them in somehow, is that what you need to do is teach by example. If you want people to know what communism is, be a community leader. Help the people in your community. Use what little, it might be the smallest ounce of privilege you have that allows you to have the free time to care about all this abstract stuff. Use that to help the people in their basic everyday lives, gain their trust, and then they can say, well, hell, if that's a communist, I'm a communist too. Who cares about the label, right? Evan brought up in the past that this is what people in the black community were saying about the Panthers. You remember what you said?
Yeah, exactly. They were talking about the fact people would come up and say, well, they're a socialist organization. They say, they feed my kids. If that's socialism, then we go to the hospital, we have healthcare. That's so, okay. And yeah, we're Panthers, we're socialists. It's simple.
It's as simple as that, guys. The labels don't matter. What they mean concretely is what matters. You can call yourself a communist, but you should show them what that actually means. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about whatever thing they have in their head that they think of it.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it comes down to action, right?
Yeah.
So the rest is just chit-chat.
Yeah. Don't tell people, you don't know what communism is. Communism is actually a moneyless, classless society. It's a really popular meme, but it's meaningless. Don't explain all these. You don't have to worry about that stuff. Be a good person. Be an effective leader. And they'll care about what communism is when they see that. They'll see how they'll see how the deeper harmony makes sense. And it'll even open their eyes to history. They'll say, I can see what this person is doing for my community, for my people, what these communists in the past were doing the same thing for their people. It'll completely open up their horizons. You won't have to educate people on this theoretical level if you're an effective and good leader. Okay, let me go down the chat. Sorry, I've been kind of neglecting.